Hi, hello and welcome back to Body-Based Therapy with me, Devraj. I want to talk today about catharsis, about emotional release, because this is a topic that I get asked about a lot, and when I reflect upon it, it's the reality that many people seek some form of emotional catharsis, this sense that they have feelings trapped inside and they want to express them in some way and get them out, but there's very, very little information about it. Traditional schools of psychotherapy do not really deal at a kind of gut level with catharsis. There's very little that's really engaging and meaningful about catharsis that is written down. I remember from my own therapist training, a few decades back, that I read a book called The Primal Scream by a very famous American therapist called Arthur Yanov. And it was some while ago, but what I recall was there was this young guy, and Yanov's doing these sessions with him, and at some point he lets out this massive kind of scream, and then his whole life is better. He's expressed this kind of primal thing that was repressed inside of him, and then he's much, much better. And certainly at that time, a lot of people were reading this book and seeking this. And I'm not aware, in my 20 years experience around this scene, of anyone who has had a similar experience. We do get a release, and I'll talk about the mechanics of creating that in a little bit. But just to calibrate your expectations a little bit, it is highly unlikely that you will have one cathartic event that will leave you forever feeling completely liberated. It just really isn't very likely. And I don't know Arthur Yanov, I think he passed away recently, but I don't know if he backtracked on that idea or whatever, but certainly it set up a kind of expectation. It was great that he was writing about this stuff, but he kind of set up a bit of an expectation that probably won't be met in therapy. Another factor here in contemplating catharsis is that, a lot of people who come to me, they write to me or they leave comments on my YouTube videos, or they're subscribed to my bioenergetic support group on Telegram. They often come with this basic idea: if I could just really, really cry my guts out one time, or if I could just really, scream in rage one time, then I would be free. But I've got these emotions trapped inside of me, and they're just holding me back, and they're pushing on me in a bad way all the time. I just need to release this. And not to negate these people's belief and experience, again, it is the case that, yes, when there's a lot of suppressed emotions, and most people have quite a lot of suppressed emotions actually, and they're getting kind of close to the surface, so to speak, yes, our mind will formulate these ideas. I just need to really let rip one time, or cry my guts out one time, and I'll be free. But again, this is very unlikely to be really the case. Yes, you can get a big release, but, it's an ongoing journey. Okay, so having put out those kind of explanatory provisos, let's just really look at what catharsis is and how we achieve it. And to me, catharsis is the body and the mind entering into an uncontrolled state where it spontaneously releases something that is held inside. And by uncontrolled, I mean the mind or the body have let go for a period the kind of control that they're normally exerting over our emotional expression and our emotional freedom, and something can just come out spontaneously. Perhaps in analogy, it's rather like, I remember being a little kid at school, and we used to find these golf balls and cut them open, and all this kind of elasticy stuff would spread out, explode out everywhere. Or like a hose, when your dad's got a hose pipe and you kind of clamp your hand over the hose for a bit, it builds up pressure, you let go and the hose kind of whips all over the place like that, it goes into a spontaneous movement. In fact, that hose metaphor was actually one that was used by the chap who taught me a great deal about catharsis. So then, okay, this is the actual catharsis, it's a form of spontaneous release. And so then the question is, how do we create this spontaneous release? And the answer to that is through mechanically performing a dynamic exercise and building it up to the point where a change of state takes place. You build up your internal energy through mechanically doing this exercise and increasing the intensity gradually until you hit a point where it's like your body goes into a different state, into a cathartic release state, and something just happens spontaneously from within. A little bit like, heating up a pan of water, it gets hotter and hotter, and at some point, it turns into steam. It undergoes a complete change of state. The same principle appears to exist with catharsis. If you build up your internal energy enough through a mechanical process, at some point, a spontaneous process takes over. And that's what we're aiming for. Now, because this two-stage process relies on hitting a point where the mind kind of lets go of control, or the holding in the body lets go of control, you can't really force it. Most things that you force are done through effort and will, and you're pushing forwards. But you can't really force yourself to be spontaneous. All you can do is set the stage for it and hope that at some point a release happens. When I was receiving a lot of therapy and going to a lot of group therapy, I often would feel like I was incapable of, I'd build up the pressure in some of these exercises and then it would just never really happen. And I was always like, I'm too much in control and, it happens for other people, but not me, and all these kind of stories. But, this was just something I had to go through. And then sticking with it, there was a point, where some form of real release from my body would take place, or I could just weep uncontrollably for a period of time and allow myself to be seen and supported. So if by any chance you're already thinking, I'm sure it won't happen for me, don't be so sure. The body at the end of the day is kind of in control of the personality. And if you just work at something over and over again, you will get there if you don't respond to the negativity in your own mind. If you don't let yourself just be controlled by that, which is a defensive strategy. So if you're worried about not getting there, try not to be too busy with it. Okay, so having built up the tension a little bit myself in this video, let's look at a couple of cathartic techniques. And actually, I'm just going to kind of talk about them and explain them. I'm not going to get down and demo them in this video. But you can look back in some of my other videos and you may find some of these anyway. One good example would be like using a punch bag and using it in a way that we're trying to create a cathartic release. Typically, if someone's using punch bag, they're building up their punching strength and they're building up their resilience, practicing their guard or whatever. I'm not a boxing person, but you know what I mean. But when we're going to use a punch bag cathartically, and by punch bag I mean one of the big heavy ones that you hang from the ceiling, rather than one of the small ones that is kind of up on a pole. When you're using it cathartically, what you do is you start by mechanically punching, a bit normally, like under control. And then at some point, you start to build it up and try to just do it as fast as you possibly can. And this creates a release. As you start to speed up, you almost find your body doing it itself at some point, and you just pump it up. What's important to do in this, and in most cathartic exercises, maybe not all, but most, is to make sound. If you close your throat and hold sound in, it's very hard to really get a deep cathartic release. The sound is important, and also that you're not controlling the sound. So you need to be in an environment where you can make some noise and not feel like, wow, I'm really worried about upsetting the neighbors or this kind of thing. So with a punch bag, you can do this. Start mechanically for a minute or so, 20 seconds, and then really just try and put everything out in a space of like 10 seconds. The whole thing. Screaming, punching, letting go. And then, at some point, maybe it only needs to go on like 10, 20 seconds at the most. You just drop down, lie on a mat, just lie flat out. Don't bother taking your gloves off. Just lie back, relax, and just simply feel your body. Allow yourself to breathe. However, just feel your body. And you'll know quite soon if a cathartic release has taken place. You may not notice it whilst you're actually in the punching phase, but afterwards it's like, wow, I really let go of something there. So that's one technique you can try. Another classic cathartic technique is known as Tantrum. And this one I know I've made a video about somewhere, so you can look it up if you're interested. But essentially, it works on the principle that little kids know how to release cathartically. If you think back to being a little kid, or if maybe that's a long time ago, and you just think about a little kid, you're 4 years old and your sibling got an ice cream and you didn't get an ice cream, and it's just overwhelmingly emotional. You're totally enraged by this horror that has happened. And if you watch little kids, they very often go into this cathartic state. They lie on their back and they start to bash their hands up and down against the floor like this, their fists up and down. They move their head from side to side and they kick. They kick down with their feet. Their knees are up and they kick down. And if you do this for about 20 seconds and then suddenly speed it up Again, making sound and making sure your head is moving from side to side, you often find your body goes into a spontaneous release. Again, you need to make sound and you must keep your head moving from side to side, because the way we typically control is to lock the head. So the body's doing this and the head and neck are completely locked. It's very hard to get a cathartic release like that. When I was doing a lot of therapy myself and on a therapist training, we used to have an exercise which was called the box, which was part of group therapy. It needed a group of people, but each individual in a group of about 8, had a go at it. And basically you took all these thick mattresses and you made like a box shape with them, no roof, no lid, with a good layer of mattresses on the bottom and then a wall of mattresses as well. And you lay diagonally across it and you started this tantrum, and then you started to really kick and punch, punching against these mattresses which the other people in your little group are holding, and it was an amazing release that you could get from that if your body really took off and went for it, It could just happen. You see some people just spontaneously, they build it up for 30 seconds and then suddenly they're just like completely letting go. Those techniques are quite full on, quite yang, and they're mostly based around really expressing anger, working with that channel. Now, when you go into a spontaneous state, you're not controlling the emotion that comes out. So it's not necessarily anger, but they are working in you're moving your body in quite an aggressive fashion and bringing it to a peak. Now, that's not the only way that you can work with catharsis. You can also do more gentle techniques which you do lying on your back and which at some point they make use of the natural function of the pelvis or the legs, the knees, to go into a release state themselves. And examples of this exercise would be the classic psoas release exercises, which you can find on my channel. And you can also find from trauma release exercises, TRE, I think they do it, and an assortment of other kind of smaller schools around the place of this kind of therapy, where you go through a sequence of exercises where you move your pelvis and your knees, your legs in a certain way. And then the final stage consists of just allowing a kind of shaking to happen and a release to happen. Similarly, exercises that really do work with the pelvis, such as pelvic rolling and pelvic lift and lower, pelvic bumping, doing those in a sequence can also you can get to a pelvic bumping sequence where at some point, your pelvis literally just takes off and does its thing and your mind is like, whoa, what the hell is this? But it feels good, so you just allow it. And your body just again goes into a spontaneous release state. It's very liberating, very satisfying. And with that also, it's good to allow some level of noise. It's good not to be deliberately blocking at the throat. We learn as kids to keep our sound in, or like something bad will happen. This is typical from a kind of Western childhood. So it is important, even if you don't need to scream and shout, to be open to sound. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some insights into catharsis and what it really means, It's the key part is some mechanical activity that you do for a while that leads to a point where your body kind of has a spontaneous release. And like I say, you can't really force it. You can only set the stage and then hope that it happens and takes off. And, just keep working at it if you're struggling with it. And at some point it will come because your body knows it. Your body knows it inside. No matter how much negativity you might have in your mind, your body knows how to do this. And if you keep trying at it, it's like riding a bike, you will get there. Thank you very much for tuning in. Feel free to check out my website, bioenergetics.org.uk, where you'll find all sorts of exciting courses and online trainings, books and more. Bye for now.